Welcome to the Catapult Lockdown Virtual Salon. This afternoon, I'll be in discussion with Lysanne GoddessEye Charles. My name is Andre Bagoo. I've been enjoying these virtual salons, which have allowed all of us to cross borders during a time of closed borders. And for this, I'm eternally grateful to Catapult partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk. I'm really looking forward to talking today to Lysanne. Lysanne is a native of the Dutch Caribbean islands of Saba and St. Maarten, and has been writing poetry, short stories, and songs, including calypsos, for the past 30 years. In 2016, 4 years ago, she wrote the winning calypso for St. Maarten's first ever female monarch. During the course of our conversation, please feel free to ask your questions in the comments section during our discussion. We'll try to get through as many of them as possible. And please also remember to subscribe to the Fresh Milk YouTube channel and social media platform pages. So now, without further ado, let's welcome Lysanne.
Hi, Andre. It's great to be here, and I want to just go ahead and also reiterate the thank you that you gave to the four organizations for making this happen, and for connecting creatives across the Caribbean during this time. So yes, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to have this conversation with you.
Oh, wonderful. Likewise. So in the spirit of a true literary salon, I understand that you're going to begin today's proceedings with a poem.
Yes, I am. I'm going to read actually from my book, which I self-published last year, called Here or Her, depending on the interpretation of the reader. And actually, I'm going to read a poem that is very dear to my heart. It's called I Want to Tell You. And it goes like this. I want to tell you. I want to tell you that you should not be afraid of rainbows. I'm sorry, Andrea. I actually have to. I'm sorry. I have to go back. What I actually want to read is a poem called "What the Elders Did Not Tell You," and later on, I'm going to read the other poem. So this
You
poem
can
is actually
read whatever you want to read.
Great, thank you. But actually, I actually want to start with this one because I want to talk about how I actually got inspired by, to be in arts later on. So I'm going to start with this one. It's called "What the Elders Did Not Tell You." What the elders did not tell you, so you could not tell us. So we did not know. We now know and tell to those who come behind us. Though they seem to need no notice, they already know this, already live this, it appears. But just so that we do not return to fear, let it be put out there, stated clear, that it is okay to be free, that who we be has always been. We have always been, again and again and again, from time's beginning. But for centuries now, they've tried to keep us hidden. Reworked our truth, twisted it in ways we found hard to refute, and rendered us mute and obscure. Told us we were diseased, sent us scurrying for a cure, even though we were often sure that no treatment was needed. Had we in numbers heeded that intuition, would we have stood stronger against admonitions of societies who wished to closet us and succeeded? Until even we began to believe it, that who we be was unnatural, and so hid ourselves. And their truths about us, spoken long enough, became factual. And so we came to fear ourselves, hate ourselves, and only those brave enough to delve beyond the bowl could reclaim it. It being the chronicles of us, rainbow colored, brilliant beneath the lies and dust. Do you remember so and so's sister who loved so and so's mother? They went good together. Or so and so's aunt who was the beloved of so and so's auntie. That is our history also. Because who we are has always been the rainbow descendants of rainbowed ancestors, sometimes birthing, always claiming, often rainbow offspring. There is nothing unnatural about us except how you think and what you thought, but should think no more. Because who we are, we have been before and will be forevermore. Despite death, despite the threat of death, despite the scorn, we were born into a tribe queered, misunderstood, and so feared. But we have no agenda save one to rebuke the lies which have been spun and live the lives we've imagined, to tell our own stories with passion in order to refashion what the elders did not tell you. Thank
Wow.
you.
Hey. My goodness. There's applause rippling across the Caribbean right now. I mean,
Thank you.
thank you so much for privileging us with that poem. And I think it leads to my first question because you are involved in so many aspects of performance, whether it's theater or performance on the page in terms of your writing. Where did this come from? Is this something that runs in your family, for instance?
I'd actually like to think it does because so I got actually this love of art from both my grandmother and my father actually. But also my family is known, I think. So when I went back and spoke with my grandmother, like she learned her love of art and culture from her grandmother, and then I think she passed it on to us. And on Saba, my grandmother is actually known to be a cultural icon of sorts. She started a Saba Carnival. She started a young organization, organization for young people called the Saba Girls and Boys Sports Society. And
This is
actually,
Carmen
Andre, this is
Simmons.
Carmen Simmons. So this is a good,
I think we have a photo of
yes,
Carmen actually.
exactly. I was gonna say
Oh,
this is a good moment to bring that up. And so yes. Yes. So there's my grandmother actually. And this is when she was actually being honored for her years of service around Carnival. And then actually the next image is of her and myself at our book launch. We had a collective book launch, which was a unique opportunity in and of itself because my book is actually about queer Caribbean topics, and her book is about her history and involvement in culture and her growing up on Saba. And that's the commissioner of culture actually of Saba with us. But being able to do that launch together actually meant that for the first time you had like a blended group together, really listening, to the both sides of the story, so to speak. But yes, going back to my grandmother, she really from young had us involved in plays and poetry, music, playing the piano. So I would like to think that I got my love of arts and culture in general from her. And actually, we still talk about a lot of topics around arts and culture even now.
and is your were your parents as well? Also, I think your dad is a calypsonian.
Well, yes, he actually sang in calypso competitions in the past on Saba, and so from him, I got my love of calypso and of music. I think because he always played a lot of music at home and also a lot of calypso.
So calypso. All right. So I'm
Yeah,
from Trinidad, so immediately
yes.
I've perked up. But tell us a little bit about the calypso scene. I mean, what is it like in where you are?
Well, I would say that so the bulk of where I did calypso was actually on St. Martin, or where I was involved in calypso was on St. Martin, and there was very much so a very male dominated, male centered space, and there were always women involved, but maybe like one or two. That has changed, I would say, in the last couple of years because you see a lot more of female presence at the calypso competitions. But for me, entering calypso was actually something that I did not so much for myself, but for my then ex-wife, or my now ex-wife, my then wife. But she wanted to sing calypso, and we actually went around trying to get some established writers to write for her. And for one reason or the other, they did not. They did not want to do so, and so I was sort of uh, forced to use skills I already had around poetry and around music to develop calypsos for her to sing. And the first year, actually, I penned one of my favorite songs. We didn't win, but I think she did very well. She showed a strong placement, and I think we certainly put the men on alert. And the second year when we went in, it was sort of like the same thing, looking around to see if people would write for her, and they didn't. So then I wrote for her again, and that year we won, and it was I think it was really good and really big and really sent a ripple, throughout the island.
Oh my God! That's such an incredible story of using the resources at your disposal to, in the end, make this huge statement. Because I think, can you tell us about the calypso that you won with?
Yes. So well, first I'll tell you just about all of the calypsos in that I wrote because like each one of them are sort of unique to me. In that I think being a artist on St. Martin and on Sable, a lot of people know that I am also lesbian. And I don't, I'm very unapologetic about it. So I often wrote um, those or aspects of that into the calypsos. So for the first calypso that I wrote for her is called Crown Me Now. And it was really just emphasizing the fact that St. Maarten had never crowned a female calypsonian or even really made it that a female could be a contender. And so I really enjoyed writing that one a lot. And then the ones that we won with was actually For the Love of St. Maarten and None Better Than the Next. And also in those calypsos, you know, I think I painted a picture of dynamics happening on the island in general, but also paid homage to the fact that here was two queer women contending for a very male dominant crown, you know, and being unapologetic with the fact that we wanted it, I wanted it, and would do what we had to get it.
God, this is so romantic, actually. I don't know if can we have the lyrics for that calypso? I think we have some lyrics because I think what I
Yes.
noticed about that was that, and not only was just the sheer fact of the glass ceiling being broken part of it, but the actual, you know, some of the lyrics in there were also
Mhm.
addressing being unashamed and being just open and visible,
Yeah.
you know, out and
Yeah.
about, you know. So
Yeah.
now I'm going to ask you to sing these two lyrics for us.
No, I'm not a singer. I'm not a singer. Even though I've competed in road march, which is something different, I'm not a singer. But I will say, because we put up the two, and I will say, so the one that says from friendly isles to isles of criminality, murder and crime increased brutality. This is our reality, but homosexuality is our immoral priority, and we still waiting. So this one actually, you know, is a very powerful song, and people were actually very amazed that I would write about it so openly and that she would sing about it so openly. And actually, the next set of lyrics would have been sung when she contended or when she defended, rather, the crown. But by then, some dynamics had changed in our relationship and also in where she saw herself singing. And actually, interestingly enough, this was a section that she refused to sing. And for me, as a writer, as a person who is sort of giving my art to someone else, it was a eye-opening experience, and actually, it made me wish I could sing because I feel like lyrics like these are important for people to hear and to really understand this sort of confrontational aspect of art, that you know that you can use art to pound home certain ideas that are worth sharing within communities. And so that's why I actually put the two up, or I
Mm.
send the two in, because one really, you know, shows how at a moment it was brought into the community and it was discussed, and people either liked it or didn't like it, but there's still a conversation had around it. And actually, how the second set of lyrics didn't actually get to have that same space.
Yeah, because I noticed the shift. I'm not sure if people can read it, but I think that you know, the first set of lyrics, they talk about how the hypocrisy of this, you know, this outrage over something
Right.
as, you know, simple as love versus so many other pressing issues to deal with. I mean, and that is something I
Exactly.
guess all of the Caribbean islands could probably all of us
Mm-hmm.
in the islands could empathize with. And then the second one, though, is more about, you know, you have a line, my life's an open book, which is just also mirrors what you just said, you know.
Right. Right.
But it's amazing how even within this narrative of triumph, there's this
Yeah. But I will say,
complexity.
yes, but I will say, so I wrote these lyrics because when we won, there was a lot of pushback from some of the male calypsonians, and also
Mm.
this idea that you know, these two lesbian women had won this crown, and so there was a lot of pushback. And actually, the following year, one of the calypsonians wrote a song called "Prick," and he made it seem like it was about an ice pick, and that he was going to prick these two, you know, female. You know, calypsonians and the calypsonian writer, but actually it was merely, you know, it bordered on not necessarily being kosher and cool. A lot of people took offense with it. You know, I took more of the middle road, and that calypso is actually supposed to be about the double entendre, and so you know, you have to kind of be a little bit flexible about it. But I wrote these lyrics exactly to counter that, in that, even in this space of people, or space of people saying negative things about our lives, that, we were going to be very unrepentant about the fact that we had done this very big thing, which is win this crown, as two women living together, loving each other, and not going to be ashamed about it.
So then let's talk a little bit more about that, because I mean that again, it points to just the power of culture and the power of music to shift and change attitudes,
Mhm.
as well as to reflect um, the challenges, and the homophobia. I mean, that is, I mean, undoubtedly a calypso like that, is something that would incite or encourage people to be violent, for instance. So I wonder then, working within this space, do you have any views in particular on just how important things that a lot of people may take for granted, like a simple soca song or calypso song or whatever dancehall song. Do you have any views on how powerful that can be, not only for members of the LGBTQ community, but also across the board in terms of progress and shaping attitudes?
Well, I definitely think culture. I mean, I definitely think culture and arts and music and poetry, all of these things combined, they're very powerful. And so they can be used against the LGBT community, but they can also be used by the LGBT community. And I think because I've been so involved in culture and art, that I've taken the stance that we should also, as much as we can, use it to put our message out there. To put our message, so to counter the violence with information, with education, so that people can get to see that some of the misconceptions that they have are actually, not true, and that they can engage in conversations. And the only way to engage in conversations is to put things out there. And so for me, that's why I use part of my art and part of my work to continuously do that. I use activism for that as well, but I also incorporate it into my art, because I think, and Clara Reyes, who is a well-known, artist and choreographer on St. Maarten, she always says, Lysanne, arts can be transformative, and you have to use it as such. And so from the time I heard that, it resonated. And for me, like, as much as possible, whenever I'm doing poems, for example, I don't shy away from doing poems. If someone says, can you come and do a poem about love? I don't shy away about reading a love poem to women. I love women, right? And so for me, I think it's also about us, where and when we can, taking space and creating new narratives, and getting people to understand that our love is also a very natural thing. And so for the book launches that I actually had around here, a lot of times people told me, they were like, listen, I'm a straight person, but when I read your poems, I can identify with the love, or with the loss, or with the longing that you had in that moment. And so for me, I'm like, there you go. Art can make connections that you may not have been able to make otherwise in other conversations.
Definitely. And I'm just going to take the opportunity now for anybody who's only now joining us. I'm Andre Bagoo, and I'm talking to Lysanne GoddessEye Charles. And if you have any questions, remember to please put them in the comments section below. You know, so just continuing that train of thought. I mean, yeah, definitely. We've had a lot of issues, particularly in our region, with figures like Buju Banton and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
this question of the role that is or is not played, the appropriate. Do we take ownership of those moments when these pejorative things are put out there? And you just mentioned Clara Reyes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You are involved in theater.
Well, I'm involved with theater primarily through and with Clara. I first met her when she heard me reading a poem about mother-daughter relationships, and she came to me. She said, "Listen, I want to work with you." And since then, we've had moments where we've shared a space around creation in theater. And so I was in one of her plays called "In the Company of Women," and then
Mm.
together we co-produced a production called The Vagina Monologue St. Maarten, or In the Company of Women, The Vagina Monologue St. Maarten. which was, it was a show that touched on a lot of taboos for St. Maarten. They had like a first scene between two women, sort of a erotic scene. We also had a dominatrix scene. There were scenes where about people exploring how they could come into contact with each other and have safe sex. So it was really a very bold statement and bold show. And then the last show that we did together was actually a show called Don't Be Afraid of Rainbows. And the whole process around that was one that I trusted Clara with, and she really took it and in her own way, because she never just says like, okay, I'm going to write a script and come and give it to people. She really brings people in, hears their stories, incorporates their stories into the show, and that is ultimately what happened. So we had all of these people from the LGBT community come in. We had like 3 sessions, I think, to begin, where people were just sharing the good parts of their lives with LGBT people, the bad parts, the really hurtful, harmful parts, and things that they had gone through. And we created this beautiful show called Don't Be Afraid of Rainbows. And we put it on, and we invited people from government to come, people from the different community organizations to come out. We had a packed house, and afterwards, like, people really came up to us and said, like, we didn't know that on St. Maarten, parents put their children out of their homes. We didn't know that, we didn't know that children were still so afraid to be themselves on St. Maarten. They're afraid to go to school, that churches would sometimes perform conversion therapy on children on St. Maarten. And so, like, we really use that production to give voice to people who sometimes have no voice, even within a tolerant society such as St. Maarten.
And I think we actually have some images of that production.
Yes, we do.
I was kind of curious, actually, as you mentioned parents. Did your what are your parents? Did your parents ever come to any of these productions?
Yes, my mother was there. I have to say, I think my family is quite supportive of me, of my art, of my life in general. So my mother was at this show. She was very proud. Also of the various moments that my story came out, because I also shared, my story of growing up a small, Catholic, unsavour, a very small community, conservative community in that vein. And so she was very proud of the fact that, I was able to share that, but also able to show the resilience and the development of myself over time. So yeah, so on the picture, I just want to say this is various members of the cast, and sharing their story. And we used song, poetry, dance, theater. We used all of it, together to make like a powerful 1 hour and 15-minute production that we put on.
And it's interesting because that theatricality, it comes right back to, for instance, the calypso, and even the writing, the poetry, spoken word, or even on the page. It has that kind of aura of bearing a costume, or just speaking truth, I guess, to power. And I was just intrigued by, you've mentioned, your family, and your dad is also Calypsonian, and
well, he was.
Yeah. But you mentioned previously, I think, that you have some ties to some of Trinidad's calypso greats in terms of who came, who was there in your household.
Oh yeah, so well, that's from my grandmother again, because my grandmother was very involved with carnival and whatnot. So I grew up with all of these different people in and out of her house, because they would stay in the guest room. So Sparrow was here and he stayed with us. Tigress was here. I love Tigress. Singing Sandra was here, and she stayed with my grandmother. Came, had dinner. So all of these people would be in and out, and I was always very intrigued with them. Up to this day, I remember like when Tigress came, she was like larger than life. And I was so in awe of her, and I was thinking like, oh, I want to do whatever she does. I want to do it. So yeah, again, my grandmother really gave me a space and introduction to arts and to these various people. And she's also been very supportive, or as supportive as she can be for someone in her age group, and being Catholic as well.
So then, given this lineage, you do spoken word, you're in the theater. Calypso next? performing, perhaps?
No, because I've really been trying to figure out how to control my voice. With roadmarch, you don't have to do it as much because it's more jump and wave and that kind of stuff. So I've dabbled in roadmarch, and if people look on YouTube very well, they can find it. But I think for me, I prefer to continue writing calypsos because I think there's also a space there for writers to make impact and really have someone with a stronger voice sing the calypsos for me. So no, I don't anticipate going onto the stage, but I definitely anticipate continuing to be active and engaged with calypso for sure, and hopefully being able to pass that on and help pass that on to future generations.
It's interesting as well. I mean, writing is definitely fundamental. And I mean, you're very much concerned as a poet with LGBTQ literature throughout the region. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
are, in addition to your publishing ventures, I mean, you've had some, for you, there are some books that have been, that have meant a lot to you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us about a few of them?
Sure. So I will pick three that really stood out to me because they helped me when I was still struggling, I think, to figure out myself and also to figure out how to put what I was thinking in regards to that on paper. So the first book is Zami, which is from Audre Lorde, and I think everyone should read it. Um, Another book is called Tongues on Fire, and it's actually stories that a lady collected from across the Caribbean region of women who love women, and how it was in their communities. And that book in particular, I will say, that book in particular helped me to feel less alone on my journey, because when you realize how similar the journeys are across the Caribbean, um, in terms of engaging with family, engaging with the community that you're in, engaging with the church, etc. It really made me see that there are many more people like me out there. And the last one I will mention is called Our People. Is by Thomas Glave, and it's a collection from across the Caribbean as well, of LGBT stories, poetry, pictures, and it also just again just gave me a sense of queer Caribbeanness, and not that is not some anomaly or some import, because oftentimes in activism, I hear that a lot, this is something that's brought in to the Caribbean from somewhere else, and this is
Mm,
not Caribbean, and actually, we've always been here, and we've always been engaged with art, we've always been engaged with everyday aspects of life. So for me, it's important just that that information is out there and that people can have it and see themselves in writing.
I think, yeah, I mean, we've had some, before this conversation, we've had some exchanges, and
Mm-hmm.
you've actually sent me a list of
Yes,
like dozens of books
yes,
that I think we would most likely share with everyone later, perhaps
yes.
on the Catapult social media pages, or maybe beneath this video, we'll post it at some stage, we'll figure it out. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, so it is an integral part of this whole notion of that intersection between culture and activism, because
Yes.
you're right, part of it is, there's this almost this animus against this idea of anyone speaking up and speaking out and being overly political, and then that is denigrated as something that is imported or foreign. But the list of books of writers who live here and now within the region
Mm-hmm.
alone kind of shows the lie of
Yeah.
that type of
Or who are
argument.
living abroad but are a part of the diaspora, like people are creating, and I think that library is kind of growing more and more, as people become more empowered in the region and write then about our lives, because in very unrepentant ways, because it's as if it's as if someone else is just writing any other story, so why hide it, why try to sugarcoat it, why romanticize it? No, like LGBT lives are just regular lives, like the trials, the triumphs, the ups, the downs. So I think, as more and more people begin to come into this and don't feel necessarily defensive, or that they have to write about it only in one particular way, because otherwise people say, well, oh, there you go, you see there's something indeed wrong with them. But you just say, listen, it's a regular life, like any other person would have a life. You're getting more and more stories and rich stories that people can find themselves in.
So then, tell us about that. Tell us about your own efforts to collect some of these stories. I think you have some projects in which you're looking to do that.
Yes. Yes, so I have a project that's coming up actually. It's called We Dance Dance Hall, and it's actually going to be a collection of stories, essays, paintings, whatever artists or LGBT artists from around the Caribbean want to contribute to this collection, which will talk about how we engage with dancehall. And why I chose to start with dancehall to begin with is indeed because of the hostilities felt, you know, by LGBT people in this particular genre. You know, people sometimes say like, oh, but you're singling out dancehall, but calypso is also quite homophobic, and you know there are other genres that are also quite homophobic, indeed. But I think in the manner in which dance hall have sort of put a lot of their stuff out there has had impact and very real impact on the LGBT community of the Caribbean. I know you mentioned earlier about Buju, and so like for me that was also a very interesting uh, moment to kind of go through when he was being released, because I'm definitely a fan of Buju Banton's music, other than one or two songs that are quite homophobic, but it was a struggle about what to feel, and for me I felt very good when he finally came out and said something, like said like, look, I've moved on from this moment. I do not subscribe to the things that I said then. It sort of lifted a burden off of my shoulder, because a lot of people were also looking to the organization I'm busy with on St. Martin, saying like, okay, well, what are you guys feeling and what do you think? And and it was interesting looking at LGBT activists across the region talk about this moment, but also from different angles. So there were people who were saying like, listen, Buju has done a lot to talk for black realities, for poor realities. So I'm not going to just push him aside because he made a song or two that spoke against the LGBT community. Whereas there were also other LGBT activists who were saying like, listen, absolutely not. This song has done so much damage to the community. We cannot just be cheering him on the fact that he's being released, and who knows what he's gonna sing next, or we're not gonna support him when he comes to country. So there were those conversations happening, and for me, it was very interesting to also sit back and observe them, and see how they resonated with me as they were happening, on social media primarily, because I also felt sort of in the middle, there, like saying, indeed, because I'm not, one dimensional. So yes, I am lesbian, but I'm also black. I'm also, I come from a background of people unstable who work very, very hard so that the next generation could be up out of poverty. So for me, it was also, okay, um, where do I fit into this whole conversation? And so that's why it really prompted me to go back to a old project that I had from 10 years ago in the Netherlands, of thinking about dance hall and how LGBT people relate to dance hall. Because I remember
Yeah,
going to a
because
conference.
there was this I'm sorry, but I just
No,
remember
no,
there's
go
this
ahead, go
other
ahead.
like you talk about that, those antinomies of either like against it, or
Mm-hmm.
for it or what. And then there's this third way, this third position where, particularly now, I think I've heard a lot of people talk about this idea of taking ownership or claiming it, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
participated a few years ago in a conference called Beyond Homophobia in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and in fact there's a whole publication about that that's just come out from
Yeah,
UE Press, and I think one of the talking points is always, well, there are always some people who are like, we'll play this song that has this lyric in a gay party, and we will
yeah,
like take ownership of it. And then some people are like, no, it's still too
yeah,
triggering. And so yeah, so there are lots of nuances in there.
yeah,
But I guess
exactly.
the importance is, I guess, just realizing what that it is an issue at all, because equally
Mm-hmm.
I have found that there are some people who just it's hard to empathize with another perspective and to think, well, how would I feel if I'm just in a space and
Yeah,
suddenly this starts to play? And do you feel safe, and
Mm-hmm.
just crossing that bridge is what is so hard, and I think that's why it's so important, this project that you're talking about now,
Yes.
in which you're gathering stories. So how will
Yes.
people be able to participate in this?
Yes. So a little later on, there's going to be a card up or a picture up about how to contact me, and they can send their submissions to either of the two email addresses that will be up there. But also, it's still a project really in development. So I spoke with one or two organizations that I'm busy with developing it, and we're going to put out an open call as well in a few weeks, and then people will also have the email accounts to send it to. But indeed, they will be able to send it to one of the two that will come up later. And for me, I think I just want it to be really a space in which people can engage with the conversation, and so that it doesn't have to be so much tension. Because I remember being indeed in Jamaica last year at the Caribbean Women and Sexual Diversity Conference, and we went to a panel discussion about this, and there was like two very polarized groups, like saying like, listen, we don't understand. One saying we don't understand why you're picking on dance hall. Calypso is also very homophobic. The other group saying like, no, this is ridiculous. People, real people's lives are at stake here. Why would you support this? Why would you support these artists? And I think having a space in which to hear real stories and how people really just think about it and rationalize their relationship with this very dominant, musical genre in the Caribbean will be something enlightening and add to the collection of queer stories out there.
Oh, wonderful. And I think now would be a great moment for you to read your second poem.
Okay, sure. So the second poem is the one that I actually started reading earlier in my nerves. And it's called I Want to Tell You. And it's actually from the production Don't Be Afraid of Rainbows. So one of the things that I felt like, when I heard the stories of the people in the room, um, a lot of times it was about this process that they had to go through from initial inklings about who they were and sort of terror about that to kind of growing bit by bit to accept it for themselves and then share it with other people and all of the different challenges that came with that. So I wanted to go back to that initial moment though, that initial terror, and talk to them and to other people who would be listening. So it's called I Want to Tell You. I want to tell you, I want to tell you that you should not be afraid of rainbows, that they are symbols of both beauty and grace, that they carry the covenants of sustenance if you dare to follow them. And at the end, there are pots of gold enough to pave your own precious streets. I want to tell you, I want to tell you that you should not be scared of rainbows, that they are sacred even unto us, that the fires of hell cannot burn as intensely as the disgust you harbor for yourself, because you do not trust that you are imperfectly perfect just the way you are. I want to tell you, I want to tell you that somewhere in the center of rainbows there is God, glorious as you've ever known God to be, reminding you that things do get better, that your ideas of yourself do get clearer, that your inner voice that you've been programmed to hear does get dimmer if you decide to redefine for yourself what is sin, sinning, or sinner. If you figure that you are worth weathering storms to reach, that we are each God loved in our own right, I want to tell you. I want to tell you that rainbows are not scary, that they carry with them the promise of rebirth, redemption, resolve, and revolution. Extraction from the delusion that something is wrong with you, the confusion that who you are is caused by nature gone askew, that you are an aberration, abnormal, unnatural, when all that is factual points out another truth, that you are more simply you, rainbow proud, beautiful, growing you, one of a kind, radiant you. I want to tell you. I want to tell you that rainbows are ours, that there is so much more to this world than what you know, and that if you are open and willing to go, then rainbows can be bridges too, taking you over abysses that you think will destroy you, over chasms you think would consume you. But if you are brave enough to brave them and go, then you will blow your own mind with brilliance. because you will have learned to be resilient and rely mainly, chiefly, principally on you. I want to tell you, I want to tell you, I want to tell you.
Ah,
Thank you.
oh, wonderful. Oh, I think this is the perfect moment to open the floor up now to questions. I don't know if there are any questions actually. So Annalie, hello Annalie. Annalie is saying, um, I believe Sabans speak Dutch and English, and maybe that other language in Spanish. Do you write in English exclusively? And if not, how does being multilingual affect your process of creative writing?
Okay, so indeed, Sabin speak English primarily and Dutch as well. And some Sabins do speak Papiamento because actually the Netherlands Antilles, or the former Netherlands Antilles, had a lot of movement between the islands. And there is a large Spanish population on Saba right now. I speak English and some Dutch, I like to say, and a tiny little bit of Papiamento. But I enjoy sort of playing with language. And usually when I'm writing poems about the relationship between the kingdom, or between the Netherlands and the islands of the kingdom, then I tend to play with Dutch a little bit because it adds a certain tension to some poems. But primarily, I do write in English, and I've written a love poem or two in Papiamento. And that is a process in and of itself because, it's not my mother tongue. So I have to think about which words make sense. Um, but indeed, I for now, I primarily write in English. I would love to learn French Creole, not French Creole, Creole, because every time I've heard people reading it, and I think like, oh my gosh, it's so musical, unlike sometimes I feel English or Dutch, which I've also tried to write a poem or two in. Um, but yes, so my process is really strictly in English. That's where I feel most fluent, most comfortable, most able to express myself. And again, like when I want to put some anger in a poem concerning the kingdom, then I bring out some Dutch because I think it's important to also incorporate that in there.
Yeah, it is a bit lots of fricatives in that language.
And yes, for
um,
sure, for sure.
but, this actually points to a nuance that I think is only possible in poetry versus because questioning you about well why calypso versus poetry versus the written word versus the and all of those nuances that you just spoke about. It strikes me that would only be possible on like in the written kind of text. You would only appreciate that in a different kind of forum as opposed to where you have this very direct engagement with calypso.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in the poem you just read, whenever you said "I want to tell you," I mean I've been lucky to read this poem. It's actually written as EYE, not
Yes,
just the I. And I don't know if you could tell
yeah.
me a little bit more about that choice.
Yeah, so I will say that, and even editing this book, it was very difficult for me because I do again like to play with words and bust up words, tear them apart, put them in brackets. Same with the title here. But so this I use it as I and I actually started using it about 10 years ago to talk one to sort of be a contrast between the I and I of Rastafarianism, and two, to speak to sort of like the three levels of consciousness that I feel that I have within myself. So the higher I, the third eye, the consciousness, the human I, and then sort of like, my lower ego driven I, which is the common I. So in that poem, when it's read, you can see it differently than if I'm just saying it. And so I remember that the lady who was editing the book for me, she was saying like, she was like, this is giving me a lot of headaches because she's like, you use it in the poem, but maybe people won't get what you're saying. So then actually in the book we had to go back and put a whole lot of footnotes to explain what certain words or terms meant. And for me, I think it's important to do that as an artist, to play with language, to be able to read it one way, for me to read it to the audience one way, but for them to also be able to read it for themselves in a different way, to connect with it in a different way. And I think so because before as well, like, people would always question me about it, like why do you spell happiness with a Y instead of an I? All of these kind of things. And for me, it was like simply saying, like, listen, in whatever way that you can, claim space, shake things up. You don't have to fit into a particular box. Your words don't have to fit into a particular box. Um, yes, and so that's why I continue to engage with words and written word in particular in that manner.
And it's incredible. It's almost like a queering of language. But of course,
Yeah,
that's just what all poets do anyhow. You
exactly,
know.
exactly.
And you mentioned editing the book. Tell us a little bit more about your first ever. How did you start actually publishing? Because I also understand that you have started your own little publishing venture.
Yes. So the first book that I started with was actually my grandmother's book because my grandmother fell quite ill a few years ago, and I really felt that her story was one that was needed to be heard on Saba because she came from a very disruptive childhood and sort of still did all of these things and contributed in all these different ways to her island. And so I sort of put pressure on her to do it. And then she's like, okay, but how are we going to get it published? How are we gonna... And so I had to start investigating for myself, like how to get it out there in the quickest way possible, the most cost efficient way possible. And doing all of those steps for her book then led me to realize that, hey, I can do it for myself. And from there, I started Zami Zami Press, which is very small, and I'm still figuring out a whole lot of details. But that's where I published here through, and where I'm going to publish my second book. And eventually, I hope to bring in other projects as well, and I'll publish more queer Caribbean literature through this organization. And I saw that we had a question, so I don't know if we can go back to it before it gets lost.
Yeah, I mean that's a wonderful story of how your publishing basically began as a kind of a love tribute to your grandmother. So,
Yes, yes.
have you had the chance to travel and perform across the region or attend literary festivals? Also, could you speak a bit about the process of self-publishing in the Caribbean?
Yes. So I have had a chance to travel. I've traveled to Tortola, I've traveled to Curacao to perform, and I've traveled, of course, I was on St. Martin because I live there. So that's the bulk, and I'm in at all of them. I've been well received, I would say. I think because indeed my poems, or at least one, because I do write about other things also, but at least one I would always put in there to kind of let people know that I'm very much busy with this as a topic. So it's been received well in some places. In other places, you can see that uh, the audiences were a little bit standoffish about that one particular poem or so. But I definitely look forward to traveling to many more festivals post COVID. I've done virtual festivals, so I will continue to do those. And the process of self-publishing, I would say it can be difficult. Like it can be difficult in particular sourcing funding, especially for the Dutch Caribbean. I've realized we have one or two places where we can get funding, and the bar is quite high to get it. I think, but the process is also sometimes very solitary because you have to figure out a lot of things on your own. And for me, it would be great if actually there can be connections between people who have done it and figuring out how to get editors who will be able to look at your stuff. I think I've been very blessed that I've had people willing to step in and say, like, listen, we believe in this project, and so we're gonna donate some of our time or give you certain things at a reduced cost. So that also made it quite possible for both my grandmother's book and my book. But I would say that, a lot of the stuff I had to figure out on my own online and just going through the processes. So I'm always open if people want, more in-depth information about what I've had to do. I actually published my grandmother's book through a small company in Tennessee first, and then later through Amazon, and my own book through Amazon. I still looking to see what other prospects and possibilities there are, and it's an ongoing journey.
Tell us, you mentioned a moment ago about, in your different travels, just picking off that question. Sometimes when you read a poem, the reaction is different. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how must it feel to go out there and be? It takes a certain bravery anyhow to be an artist and present your work, but to present something as personal as this and for the reaction to not quite be what you would hope. How does that make you feel?
Um, it makes me feel sad, but it also just, reiterates the fact that we have work to do. And so for me, I always take it from that standpoint. Of course, like it does take bravery, and for me, even like sometimes I see myself right before I have to say a certain word, like or when I have to say the female pronoun, um, like sometimes I would see myself seizing up because I know it may not be received well, but I also push myself through that wall because I know that I can do it, and there are many more who may not be able to do it. And because sometimes I'm coming to certain spaces and have a certain safety because I'm an outsider that people who
Mm.
maybe are insiders don't have. I feel compelled to do it because I want to leave something better behind for for the younger generations. Because my own story, I mean, even though I have the support of my family, it was still quite um, painful, going through the whole 10-year coming out process. So for me, if I can scrap that for just one or two or three or four, I feel like I've it's worth it to be uncomfortable for me to be uncomfortable.
So then, what was that process like for you? I mean, you're obviously very close to your family and things are fine
Mhm.
now, but it seems as though maybe that's not how it began.
So how it began is because like Saba in general is a community where don't ask, don't tell, just But I'm a teller, so I told my mother, I said, and I told my grandmother as well. I said, I think I like women, and so my grandmother and my mother were both like, at 15, everybody likes each other. Don't worry about that. Just pray to God. It's gonna go away. And I was also raised sort of by this very religious community from Trinidad, actually. So I was raised by them when my father passed away. And so there was this certain amount of pressure, I think, from, that I had internalized that I just could not be gay. And so I really struggled with that for 10 years, like figuring out from 25, I mean, 15 to 24, like really saying like, I don't want this. This is not me, and just because I also didn't want to disappoint my family, I didn't want to disappoint these people who had, invested so much time and energy and assisting my family and helping out with us. But in the end, I also realized that I had to be true to myself, and I couldn't continue to, self harm in order to make other people comfortable. I had to really like live my truth, write my truth, tell my truth, and just live. And once I did that, my family very quickly came around to just be like, okay, this is just Lysanne and this is who she is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think given all that's happening these days, the importance of that is all the more urgent in a sense. I
Yeah,
think we have
exactly.
another. Yeah, I mean, how are you feeling actually about that? Like, I don't know if you're following the election results
I
or.
am, I am, and my fingers are very much crossed because I just feel like there was so much progress made in the previous years that this pushback, I think it took us by surprise, but it was coming, But I don't think we can take another 4 years of it, and because I think sometimes the U.S. sets the tone, whether they should or shouldn't, sets the tone for how a lot of um, things are viewed across the Caribbean region, but also the rise of the right in Europe and all that kind of stuff. I think like if that is cut short now, that will be much better for everybody than another 4 years of the pushback.
Yeah, do you think then that, where perhaps politicians might fail, we may have to resort to depending more on artists?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
but I do think that art has really helped to make this change, and not just not just for LGBT equality, but also for women's rights, also for uh, rights for Black people, and for other minorities. I think arts give people a space to engage with material in a way and to also process it and internalize it in a way that they wouldn't be able to do so otherwise. Like I remember at Don't Be Afraid of Rainbow, like I saw like politicians who had sort of been very, like resolute about, St. Martin being a Christian society, and so things had to be done this way, like with tears in their eyes, because they really heard the story firsthand from somebody who had been through something quite terrible about something that they couldn't even do anything about, being gay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, gosh. So yeah, so lots of work to do.
Yes,
So
lots of work to do.
I think we had another question.
Yes.
If you could choose three other artists that could um, could have been outspoken like Buju to deliver the right message, who would they be and why? Oh
Well,
yes, I think.
yeah, I would say right off the bat, Calypso Rose has done
Yes.
her part in the last years, and
Mm,
advocating for the community and being, very outspoken about her life and how she lives her life. I actually had the privilege to meet her in 2016, and she was awesome. I also think not in music but in poetry, Stacey Ann Chin has done so much work. She's based in New York now, but she's done so much work, I think, bringing light to Caribbean realities, that I would have to choose her. And then who else? I have to really think. Um, I know that there's been in recent times, like, some calypso artists, I mean, some soca artists who have been also very outspoken for the LGBT community and very supportive of the LGBT community. So I would just pick those people in a group and say, like, continue to speak up for us and speak out for us. Um, for example, Marcel has said, like, please just let people live their lives. Nadia Batson as well, and some others. So I would just ask them to continue to speak up and out for us.
yeah, and that dovetails quite nicely because it's not just members of the LGBTQ community; it's allies, it's people just
Mm-hmm.
like recognizing the responsibility and the power that they have, or the
Exactly.
platforms that they have, be it in their
Yeah.
soccas or just in their positions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could probably go on, but we're going to have to wrap up now. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I'm so excited to hear about all your projects, and I hope everyone contacts Suzanne in that regard. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I will be back around 4 o'clock this afternoon to talk with the Puerto Rican writer Beatriz Janine Figuera. And that's another conversation that I'm looking forward to. So, in closing today's salon, I'd like to express once more huge thanks to the CATAPULT partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, Fresh Milk, and everyone else who's worked to make this salon happen. Now, remember, I won the election according to the legal votes. Goodbye.
Goodbye.